Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Barrientos. I'm a conservation photographer and filmmaker. And today I'm going to tell you about a long-term multimedia project that I've been running for the last 3 years to build support for forest restoration and resilience by explaining it with multimedia. And in it, you'll learn a bit about forest ecology and what forest resilience is. You'll see some techniques for explaining resilience, and you'll learn about some resources that you can use to do that in your own work. And if you're not in the world of forest or fire yourself, hopefully you'll still get an example and a framework of communicating complex issues with visuals. So I'm passionate about making impactful stories about conservation, supporting conservation. And as we all know, issues are complex. Important issues are complex. They don't have clear right and wrong answers, clear problems, and clear solutions. They're nuanced. And often there's a strong social component involved. And that makes it even more complex because changing minds is really hard, especially now. We know that in-person experiences are one of the best ways at getting people to do that. If you can take people to a site and see a project or introduce them to people from a different background, that's great. But that's not usually feasible for everyone who needs to be reached. And so one thing that I do is try to recreate some of those experiences with multimedia because we can explain a lot with visuals. And during the Cameron Peak fire, I felt that this was one issue that wasn't being fully and nuanced, communicated in nuance. And this concerned me as much as the fire itself, because while fire is the problem, it's also the solution. I come from a background with fire, so I approach it a little bit differently than most people do. But starting in 2015, I started reintroducing fire on prescribed burns to ecosystems that depend on them. Things like here in southern Florida's pine flatwoods and Nebraska's tallgrass prairies and in Oregon's montane forests. And I've seen firsthand how fire restores ecosystems and restores their resilience to disturbance. And during the Cameron Peak fire, coverage, understandably, was really focused on the bad. During those days of orange skies, it's news cameras zoom in on the biggest flames and the blackest aftermath, and then left. And then that cycle repeats with the next fire. And while that's part of the story, and those are legitimate problems, it's not the whole story. The situation is more complex than that. And the reality is, to build resilience to wildfire, we need to better explain fire. But this topic is hard for people to access. Not many people ever get to see forest fire. It's hard to see. But visuals can help do that. And I wanted to use photography and videography to help paint a more complete picture of the complicated role of fire in Colorado's forests, and with Cameron Peak specifically. In case anyone doesn't know and is new to the state, Cameron Peak was the largest wildfire in Colorado's history in 2020. And my goals were to show people that fire is a natural part of Colorado's forests. Fire's effects are diverse, and fire can be beneficial to forests. And if we prepare forests to receive fire, they can rebound from it naturally. A very brief primer on forest ecology. So fires have been moving through Colorado's forests for essentially as long as they've existed, and there's a natural resilience and adaptations to them. But starting in the early 1900s, the US started suppressing fires really aggressively, putting them all out. And without natural recurring fires, forests grew overly dense, denser than they had ever been, like you see here in this photo. And that leads to more fuel. All of this is fuel, which means more severe fires. And it was homogeneous fuel, which makes for larger fires, which is what gets us to where we're at today, mega fires, like here above Chambers Lake up the Poudre Canyon. So, while fire has a natural role, at the same time, increasingly large and severe fires are a problem. They are a threat to our forests. So I also wanted to increase support for building their resilience to fire in the forms of forest thinning and prescribed burning. And very quick background on that. The abundance of scientific literature tells us that the most effective way to restore forest resilience to fire is first by selectively thinning the forests that have grown overly dense to densities that can then allow reintroduction of fire under moderate weather conditions in what's called prescribed burning or controlled burning. And so this is what I was trying to work towards. So back in the very beginning of 2021, I planned this long-term multimedia project to do that, pitched it to these groups that you see here, was honored when they all agreed to fund it and or guide it, and thus Fireforest was born. One thing that I knew I needed to do was show the connection between fire, forests, and water, because through water, essentially everyone's connected to this. And I wanted to do it in a way that would catch people's attention. So with the help of a group called Platte Basin Time Lapse, I set up a long-term time-lapse camera on the Poudre River as it runs through an area burned by the Cameron Peak fire. And starting in May of 2021, the camera's taken periodic photos every day during the day. And during the summer of 2021, it documented those extreme turbidity events when high rainfall flushed all that sediment and ash into the Poudre River, like you're seeing right here, leading to the Black Hollow flood. And in doing this, it's giving us a tool to show people for the first time that connection between forest and fire and water in a way that hasn't been done. It also has helped us show things like the long-term accumulation of sediment in the riverbed to help people understand why years later we're still seeing the river turn black after high rainfall, because it's the sediment's in the riverbed. It's getting resuspended. So that's still ongoing. A second component is photo monitoring. I was really curious to see how different forest types would respond and to document that, because we know that forests' resilience to fire is getting stretched. As our climate's getting hotter and drier, it's getting harder for trees to regenerate after fire. We don't know what the forests will look like in a decade, and we don't even know if there will be a forest after a decade after these fires. So I wanted to explore that using high precision repeat photo points that let you compress years into seconds. And I set about a dozen of these up in different forest types that burned at different intensities and photographed them right after the Cameron Peak fire in May of 2021, then at the end of the growing season in August, and then the following August, and then last August. And here's what I saw. So in high severity fire and lodgepole forest, there's a mixed response. In some areas, we see almost no plant growth after 2 growing seasons, but we do see erosion of the soil in the absence of that vegetation. But in some points, I did find that natural resilience. If you watch right about here, you'll see lodgepole seedlings sprouting up that first year in the ashes. And that continued over the last 2 years. A couple didn't make it, but this one's still going strong. Here's a different angle. You can see as these guys go from being babies to what I call lodgepole teenagers, scraggly and awkward and weird. But then last year they started to hit their stride and continue to grow along with a lot of other plant species. And this shows us that it lets us show people that there's hope, even when a forest looks completely black, that a black forest isn't destroyed. It shows fire forest's natural ability to recover from fire And if we prepare forests to receive fire, then they can express that resilience to it. And another point, photo point further lower elevation shows that in a really exciting way. This is from a stand that was thinned before the Cameron Peak fire got to it. And the fire there was really low intensity. And in the first year, there was just an amazing flush of wildflowers and grasses. And that continued in the second year, although a bit drier. Things got interesting last year, though, when you look at the trees. So if you look at an individual tree, this one at first seems like it's dead. And I was so excited that first growing season that it resprouted green needles at the top. And that continued in the second summer, and it seemed like things were great. But then this year I went back and some of these trees were turning brown again. So I don't know what the takeaway is yet, except that time and nuance are important. Not one of these snapshots tells the whole story, and we need these sorts of long-term stories to cover that. So stay tuned, because I'm still going to be going back there this year. Third was a photo essay that is intended to show people the diversity of fire's effects, to give people a picture beyond a giant wall of flames that leaves forests completely black and dead, because there's a spectrum of fire severity from low to high. And although we've seen a concerning growth in high severity fire, all fire types have their place in Colorado's forests, and these low and moderate intensity burns are so important for restoring forest resilience. So I went out to look for these burn effects, and I did see a concerning amount of high severity fire, but I kept looking, and pretty much everywhere I went, I could still find some good fire effects, the kinds that weren't being shown on the news or on Instagram. I found beautiful burn mosaics like this, which are so important for preventing future megafires, because when your forest looks like this, it's a lot harder to have a 200,000 acre fire. I also found amazing regrowth and resilience in the plants. In many areas, the burn released a flush of nitrogen and phosphorus. The reduced canopy cover allowed for more sunlight and created just gorgeous wildflower super blooms. And I found hope in sites like lodgepole seedlings sprouting from the ashes. Last, my current focus is on editing a short film about how forest thinning done by the Larimer Conservation District and a U.S. Forest Service prescribed burn helped firefighters stop a portion of the Cameron Peak fire at Drala Mountain Center. We know that stories are one of our best shots at making people consider another perspective and rethink their own. And this is an amazing story that needs to be told widely. Its intent is to encourage more landowners and land managers to adopt or facilitate forest restoration on their property by demonstrating the amazing potential payoff that it can have. So I'm editing it now, and we'll be soon partnering with organizations to screen it across Colorado this year. So how can any of you apply any of this? Well, for one thing, you can use all these resources. The whole intent with Fireforest is to create these high quality, long-term resources to be used by organizations that are working in forest health, wildfire safety, wildfire recovery, watershed, water quality, because not everyone has time to make these kinds of things. So I want it to be useful to you all. And also, like, the idea is, I don't have a huge audience. The idea is to put it into your hands and get it in front of the people who need to see it, the recreationists, the land managers, the politicians, the funders. It's really meant to build support and social license for the work that you're doing. Last, here's my contact info. Really, please do reach out if you're interested in using any of these materials, if you're interested in collaborating on anything. I really do want these materials to get out there and support the work that you're doing. So please get in touch, and thank you all for your time and your interest.